Welcome to the 5th episode of the Hello World podcast. My name is Sean Wildermuth, and I'm your host. The Hello World podcast is where you can hear from some of your favorite developers, authors, and speakers about how they got into this business. We go way back to their first computer, their first code experience, and even their first job. Today I'm really delighted to have Jesse Liberty join me. Jesse Liberty is a master consultant for Falafel Software. He's a Microsoft MVP, a Telerik MVP, an author, and he creates courses for Pluralsight. Jesse hosts the popular Yet Another podcast, and his blog is considered required reading for many. Formerly, he was a senior evangelist for Microsoft, a XAML evangelist for Telerik, a distinguished software engineer at AT&T, a software architect at PBS, and vice president of information technology at Citibank. You can follow Jesse on Twitter by going to @JesseLiberty. Jesse Liberty is a friend of mine from way back, and I think he has a great story. In fact, he goes so far back that we're going to mention things like paper tape and even punch cards. Take a listen. Welcome to the Hello World podcast. This is Jesse Liberty, a good friend of mine from many years ago. I was anxious to get him on the podcast because, he's got what I think is a really interesting story about how he got started. How you doing, Jesse?
Hi, Sean. I'm doing well. I'm trying to decide about that being a friend from really long ago, because we're still friends. But
that's true.
We've known each other a long time.
We have known each other a long time. I think we're still friends, right? I mean,
we are still friends, and it occurs to me that we've known each other long before anyone else knew us, is one way to put it.
Yeah. Well, you were somewhat known because by the time I met you, you had already written a handful of books and that sort of thing. I was working on my first book at the time. I think we met.
Yeah, I wrote my first book in kindergarten.
Yeah,
I swear.
I figured. Yeah, you were doing the TI-99 Get Started, right?
Yes, that's right. I got to tell you, when my first book came out, Teach Yourself C++ in 21 Days, I could not wait for the publisher to send it to me. I went down to the local bookstore and bought a copy because I was so blown away.
Oh, absolutely. The same thing happened with me. I mean, I didn't go buy a copy. I don't remember where it came, but we took the cover proof they sent and we got it framed and all of this.
And the funny thing is that when I meet people who have written books still today, as long as they're not technology books, I'm like blown away. Like, wow, you wrote a book? It's just this odd mystique. The best thing about writing a book is that someone has described it as a 600-page resume.
Yes.
And it certainly does that.
The first book does. I mean, that's the problem with those of us who keep on writing books. I don't know what the payoff is after that.
It's not only diminishing returns, it may actually be negative after a while. All this guy can do is write books.
Yeah. He's never written software. He just writes books.
Right, exactly. So should we start the show?
We have started the show. This is how we start the show. I don't know if you know that. It's very loose and...
I like it.
Oh, good. So tell us when you got started with computers. The mystique with a lot of the guys that have been on is that, they came out of the womb with a keyboard attached to their hand.
Yes. Well, a lot of the guys you've had on are young enough that they grew up with computers, and I'm not. And I actually started with computers a few different times. The first time was when I was in high school in 10th grade in 1970, I admit it. And we had 3 different types of computers we had access to. One was we had a terminal for a computer that was actually at the Board of Ed, one of those giant IBM 360s that are in an air-conditioned room.
And was that with a screen, or was that just the typewriter and the paper?
Neither of the above. It was punch cards.
Oh, punch cards. That's right.
Right. And writing in Fortran 4. And I didn't much like that. We also had two, what I would loosely call desktop computers, in the sense that they were the desk. They were quite big. One was a Monrobot, and you can actually get pictures of that online. It's the size of a nice-sized office desk, and it had an electric typewriter that you could type code into, and it had paper tape. And I would have said that we programmed in assembly, but I was corrected recently by an old buddy from high school who tells me that we actually were writing in machine code. It was ones and zeros, which is just astonishing. And the big coup, you sort of made your bones by creating a Fibonacci series program. And getting it right.
And getting it right.
And, you feed the paper tape into the little sprocket holes, and it loads up the reader. And the third machine we had was an Olivetti, which was just paper tape. And I remember, I think it was on the Monrobot, that there was also a somewhat higher level language, and some of the math students who were not computer geeks would use it for that higher level language. And we thought it was a riot to take over the loader and have it, when they tried to load their program, have it say, "Go away, I'm sleeping," and shut the computer down. And we thought that was the funniest thing. It got old pretty quick, I'm afraid. Yeah. So that was my first round.
Interesting, because that difference between assembly and machine language. When I started, I did machine language for 6502 as well as for, I think the Apple was running the same processor, if I remember right. I was doing it for Commodore and Apple. And I remember when I first saw assembly language, and there was sort of this mystique of, oh, that's really low level. You should be doing C++ or C. And I thought, assembly language added all these great features that made it easier to write machine language. I was like, how would we possibly need a higher level language than this?
That's right. That's correct. In fact, when in my much later life, when I decided I would like to learn C, the fellow who was going to teach me C said, well, first you need to learn assembly. So I learned 8080 assembly, which was great, but there was a product called the Visible Chip, I think it was called, and it showed you not only the machine code, but the microcode. And so you learned about latching and unlatching and all this stuff. Wow. And so you put in one assembly call and watch all this machinations happen. It was very, very cool. And for a while, first of all, learning assembly before C made C much easier and certainly made pointers easier.
Sure.
But also we used to embed assembly in C programs where performance or size really mattered.
Absolutely.
So, them's was the old days. I do remember that there was a time that I felt that to be a good C programmer, you needed assembly, probably because I knew assembly.
Sure.
And then when C++ came along, that became questionable. And by the time we got to 16-bit machines and 32-bit machines and C# and just, forget
and
it.
Loaders and all that,
Right.
Yeah.
Right, because what you were looking at wasn't what was really there anyway. So,
yeah, I had stopped doing assembly or machine language very early in my career and had come back and I tried to learn C++ maybe 10 or 12 years later. And I just remember sitting at home because I was learning it on my own. Just, I would go, I guess if I keep on putting a cast in front, eventually it'll compile, because I was just at a loss what any of this meant.
Yes.
And I just tried throwing stuff at the wall until eventually it started to sink in. Oh, you can't just cast an int into a string and it should work.
Right.
Or, or a null pointer into a string and expect it to work. It was all those sorts of things that if I had gone back, I think, and learned assembly and remembered or relearned assembly and remembered, what pointers really were, it took me a long time to get my head around that.
Well, C++ was a Trojan horse, quite intentionally and consciously. It was. Sure. It was a way to take C programmers into object-oriented programming with something that looked syntactically very much like C, but was nothing at all semantically like C. It was a totally different world. And the analogy that I've used is if you went up to an Italian in the 18th century and you gave him two books, one was also written in the 18th century, but in French, and the other was in Italian, but written in the 20th century. Which would he understand better? And C++ was written in Italian, but from a whole other century.
Sure. Yeah, it's a whole different piece, and it took me so long to learn that I really latched on to this has to be the way you write all software. Because when managed code and even Java came in, I was a late adopter to it because I didn't want to get LICO pointers. I finally figured them out. So why are you taking them away now?
Interesting, because when C# came out, I got the early bits from a buddy who went to PDC. And my experience of C# was, I'm not going back and you can't make me, because I loved memory management. Maybe from having spent way too much time chasing null pointers and memory leaks and et cetera, et cetera.
It's not that I wanted to manage my own memory, is that I didn't trust someone else to.
Yeah, I understand.
It wasn't until it was actually Keith Brown, who's the one of the principals at Pluralsight now, who I took a course he did in .NET where he finally explained to me what the allocator was doing and how it was managing the memory, that I finally went, okay, I can trust it now. They did this lab where you actually watched it work.
That's very interesting. Sometimes you discover parallels you didn't know you have, because the guy who made C# light up for me was Mike Woodring, who is now at Pluralsight.
Of course, yeah.
And at the time was at Developmentor, and his class on C# was the best class on programming I've taken anywhere.
Wow, not surprising. Yeah. I was with Developmentor back then as a software developer, not as a trainer. And when the little startup that Chris Sells had started fell apart, they said, we can't pay you anymore, but you can take as many classes as you want. And since I was unemployed after that, I took as many classes as I could find there.
That's very cool.
Yeah.
We probably ran into each other and didn't know it.
Probably. You may have been in that class.
Now, the question was, were you in Central Park in 1969 during the protests?
No, but I was conceived in the summer of '68 in Central Park.
I see. Well, that's good to know. That may be more than I needed to know.
Yeah. My mother won't admit it, but that was my father's story the whole time he was alive. So after 10th grade, you didn't jump straight into C and assembly. There was
I didn't. I didn't like computers, and fortunately,
and you still don't, right?
That's true, but I didn't like programming then, and I switched over to the English department, and I actually think that was a good thing, because the people I know who stayed with computers then went on to work with mainframes and stayed with mainframes, and I held out. And when minis came along, I held out. And it wasn't until the PC came out that I really switched over. And
the original IBM PC, though.
Yes, right? Yes. I was in social work school, and they had a CPM machine. Well, in theory, they had an MPM, multi-user CPM machine, but it didn't multi-user very well.
Sure.
And we decided, my wife and I had both dropped out of social work school, and we decided that we would start a word processing business. And so we needed a computer. We almost bought a CPM computer. Fortunately, we didn't. What we did was we bought an IBM PC. We waited for the floppy disk to come out. Originally, they had cassettes. So we got a 2 floppy disk, and we splurged and went up to 128K. Which the guy in the store said, "What do you need so much memory for?" And we bought DOS 1.0, but we had to bring it back and get 1.1 because it wouldn't support that much memory.
Sure.
And a monochrome monitor for and we got a really good deal. It was only $3,500. And one thing I remember was that a box of 10 floppy disks was $60.
And these were 5 1/4 floppy disks.
Yes, these were 5 1/4 floppy disks. They held not a lot. I don't remember, frankly, how much they held. And there was a big question about, did you get single-sided or double-sided? Because the double-sided held twice as much.
And what I found interesting back then is that the difference between the two was a little slot so that you could cut yourself with scissors.
Yes. So here's a story you'll enjoy. After we got the PC, my wife worked at home doing word processing, and I did contract word processing, and I got a contract at Citibank. And I went up to the fellow and I said, I'd really like to work here. You have a lot of computers and I'm really interested. And he said, well, we want to create a program to do customer support. And he said, and I said, well, that's great. I would love to do that. And he said, okay, the requirements are 5 years of experience or a master's in computer science. And I said, perfect. I don't have either of those. So I got that job, which was great. And the part of the story that I think you'll enjoy is that my boss decided I was working on IBM PCs, but he was working on Apples. And he decided to buy an Apple hard drive. So he got 5 megabytes for $5,000.
Yes.
And you can now get 5 terabytes for under $500. So I think that's 10,000 orders of magnitude, something. It's insane. Truly insane.
The first hard drive I worked with was on these old TurboDOS multi-user CPM machines. And it was an 8-inch chassis, so it was a really big device. Mm-hmm. But what was really cool was the back wasn't metal. It was plexiglass, so you could watch it work.
Oh, that's very cool.
See everything move. We actually, when we dismantled the computer, we sold the hard drive to a school for computer repair so they could show people actually how it worked, because it was still a working drive when we sold it.
You know, this is called Programmer Dozens. And my favorite take on that in my day was a Dilbert, in which this guy said, in my day, we had to work in ones and zeros. And Dilbert says, you had zeros? We had to use O's.
Exactly. Exactly.
And I got trumped by a guy at Citibank when I was playing this game, because he said, oh, yeah, well, I remember the day that we all went downstairs to watch them wheel in 16 more bytes of core. So you just can't win this game.
No, you can't. You can't.
So anyway, that was how I came to actually start programming, was at that gig at Citibank.
And what were you programming in?
I was programming in DBase 2. Which, if you'll remember, had a dot prompt.
I do.
And it just sat there
a long time.
doing nothing. And I wrote a whole system in that. That was a great deal of fun. And I got early on, when I was just beginning to consider myself a programmer, I got 2 customer service calls. I took the customer service calls from time to time because I was building a customer service system and I wanted to know what they were handling.
Sure.
And especially if they had a technical call, they passed it to me. So one call I got on this day was a man who said, I got your disks. I don't know how to turn my computer on. and the second call I got was from somebody who said, are you aware that you're not dropping DTR on reset? And I said, I don't know. That fellow turned out to be turned into a good friend. And he's the one who taught me assembly and taught me C. And he was a serious assembly hacker.
Oh, nice.
And so I did that work. And then they made the mistake of putting me on the fast track in the bank, and I really didn't want to be a banker. And I made the mistake of going on vacation, which gave me time to think about it. So I came back and quit and took a job as a 6th grade teacher where I taught math. I was licensed for high school social studies, so of course I taught 6th grade math.
Of course.
And this was New York City. And I also talked my principal into letting us have a logo class, which was a great deal of fun. And my hands down coup as a teacher, I was not a great teacher, but my hands down coup was I was teaching them binary. And what I did was I had them line up and sing their notes depending on their binary representation.
Oh, nice.
And I would hold up a number and they would have to, the right people would have to sing their note.
Wow.
It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, teaching binary actually is a lot of fun.
Well, they taught us binary and hexadecimal when I was in 5th grade. And in the dedication to my first book, it says, to Mrs. Kalish, who taught me binary and hexadecimal when neither she nor we knew why.
Absolutely.
She had no clue why this was worth learning, but she taught it because it was the new math.
I only learned binary because on many of my early computers, in order to do certain things, you had to set the dip switches, if ever anyone's old enough to remember dip switches. And there you had to understand what each of the switches meant and what the corresponding number was. And so by the time I got into programming where I needed to know about it, it was like, oh, okay, these are just, virtual dip switch settings. And,
yes.
And it all kind of fell together.
After a while, I took a job helping a buddy, and we were working on a PDP, which was running Ristus. And the boot sequence, you had to flip switches, and they were in octal. They were the boot up sequence in octal, which it turns out that CompuServe ran on PDP machines. And that's why your PPN, which stood for programmer something number, I can't remember anymore, was only went up to 7. All the digits only went up to 7 because it was actually an octal number.
Interesting. Yeah. I never knew that. I used to know my CompuServe number by heart.
I know mine, 72241,72.
And can people contact you there?
No, but I should do something with that number. I should turn it into a phone number or something, an email address.
Tattoo. Yeah.
How about that? 72241,72 @gmail.com.
Gmail will probably drop the comma or allow dashes.
It wouldn't work.
You know how they do that. And so you left the bank. And you left the bank mostly after learning DBase. This was before you learned assembly and C++, right?
Right. I'll give you the brief rundown. I left the bank. I came back for the summer, and they made me the proverbial offer I couldn't refuse. So I did come back in their human factors group, and our job was to make their home computing accessible and easy to use.
Nice.
And while I was there, we hired a guy to do some coding for us, and he taught me Unix and C. And then he had to give up his business to go take care of his family business. So I took it over and became a Unix and C programmer. And after a short while, I narrowed it down to a single client, which was PBS. And we built Learning Link, which was a system for teachers and students. And that was great fun and a long story, but I did a lot of Unix and C. And I got a call from a buddy who I used to work with at Citibank who was up working for Ziff Davis.
Oh.
And we went back and forth a number of times because I did not want to come up to Boston, but he said, well, come up and see this guy because I think he really has a job you want. And it was in C++, building cross-platform Windows and Apple. And as you would expect, I said, perfect, because I don't know any of those. And I got the job. I turned down the job. Then my wife decided that she would like to go to library science school, and a really good one was up here in Boston. And so I called up and said, is that job still? And I did that as a team lead for a while, and then got very, very lucky. I went to the CTO and said, I really just hate being a manager. And he said, well, you don't have to be. And he created a job for me in which I would be handed some kind of problem, and I would go and assemble an ad hoc team of people who were on the bench, weren't particularly busy, and we'd solve that problem and go on to the next one. And it was great fun.
So you could lead them, but not necessarily have to manage them.
Exactly.
And how do you envision those roles being different? Because that's something that I've experienced in my career, and I'm curious how that manifested in yours.
For me, there were many differences, but for me, the major difference was that I was pretty good at working with people who were as good or better than I am. But when I had somebody who really needed some help and could be a good programmer with the right manager, I just wasn't great at that. I didn't have whatever the touch is to bring that person up and along. And I didn't have a lot of patience for the time management and for the career management part and the HR part and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I really wanted to just stay very, very focused on the technology because, I'm a geek and,
Sure.
and my people skills are acquired, as they say. So, and an acquired taste, no doubt.
And so the people that you had working for you that were people who, could become good developers, but were, problematic for one reason or another. Were these about soft skills or were these about needing to learn technical skills?
It was some of both. And it's not even fair to characterize them the way I am, because I think with the right manager, they would have done, and they did when they got the right manager. In fact, what we did was we took a guy who was working for me and made him my boss and the head of the group. And he did very well bringing those folks along.
Oh, great.
I worked really well with people who worked very well independently.
Sure. It's a little ironic since you did so much training later. That's why I was sort of drawing that parallel is when they worked for you. But it was learning how to teach people an acquired skill as well? Is that something that matured over time?
I think it was. I did a lot of teaching. I taught at Brandeis in their night school.
Oh, nice.
I taught computer stuff and taught at a bunch of conferences, presented at a bunch of conferences. Sure. And there's no question that there was a lot of learning about how to teach. And the other piece is that when I'm sitting down to teach, as it were, writing a book or doing a Pluralsight course, then that's what I'm doing. And I can put all my attention into, okay, how do I do this well? But if I'm trying to build a product and someone is constantly interrupting with questions that are things that I would have hoped they would know,
sure,
then it's hard. It was hard at the time for me to be patient. Now I'm much more medicated now, so I probably would be better at it.
So when you were on the other side of that, let's say when you were learning C++ from your friend when you were doing the Unix work, were you the guy that would sort of hammer forward and try to learn it in your bubble, or would you lean on them a lot and walk into their cube, as it were?
That's a very interesting question. I think back then I was more of a hammer through it kind of guy. These days, I find that I like to collaborate and that I learn best by pair programming, working with other people, comparing notes,
sure,
or just asking for help, frankly. And so I've become much more of a pest than I used to be. Interesting.
Early in my career, I wouldn't go to anybody because I had that notion in the back of my head that if I told them my weakness, that they would figure out that I was faking the whole thing, right? That I was about to be found out that I didn't know what I was doing, and how did I even get this job if I went and asked the question.
There's a lot of that going around.
Yeah, and so slowly in my career, I became better at going, oh, you know what? I don't have to be the smart guy this time. This guy knows it. Why don't I, use his expertise and all that? Until at some point, you became the guy people came to, and having to learn how to, I'm busy or I'm not too busy to help, figure that out.
Yes. Although actually, when you become the guy that people come to, there's a hidden danger there that you then re-enter that model of I can't ask questions because I can't reveal that. I mean, people are coming to me. I can't reveal that I don't know.
Sure.
And at one point, I was actually tempted to create a dummy Twitter account in a different name so I could ask the questions that I was kind of embarrassed to ask under my name, and then I decided that was crazy. so I quickly got rid of that idea. And you just have to ask the questions.
You do. That's actually something I learned from Chris Sells. Was we would be in a meeting, and I had this sort of hero worship when I first met him, and he was speaking in a Develop Mentor and all that, and we'd be talking through a technical problem, and he'd go, "I don't know, let's find out what that is." And I'm like, "Well, what do you mean? You're supposed to know when you're not bothered by it."
Right.
There was this sort of like, oh, I don't have to be the well of everything. And of course, as I get older, I forget more than I ever learned. So having to look up everything anyway.
There's that. And It's interesting. I mean, we could have a whole other discussion about the insecurity factor, because some of the people I know who are major names in the industry and are really good at what they do, I know for a fact suffer from that same fear of any minute I'm going to be found out to be a fraud. And I'm not sure what drives that, and I'm not sure if that's true in every industry, but it certainly seems to be very common in our industry.
I agree. I used to think it was whether someone had a degree or not, and then I found a bunch of people who, have bachelor's and master's and even a doctorate in one case, and they're still like, I don't know, I'm about to be found out. That whole sort of psychosis around it. And this last MVP summit I went to was the first MVP summit I've been at that none of that came up.
Mm-hmm.
I finally, after 10 or 11 MVP summits, I was like, I guess I do belong. I am supposed to be
I'm
here.
supposed to be here. That's right. Nobody's about to come and say, what are you doing here? Give me that identity. Get out.
Yeah,
Give me those
I don't know why it took so long, but
I think you should have Andrews on your show and find out if he suffers from this kind of insecurity.
That would be very interesting.
He's got to be certainly one of the brightest, most capable, most influential, most successful developers ever.
Sure.
And if he suffers from it, then there's no hope for anybody.
That's funny. So how did you get into, when we met, you were teaching C#. We had brought you in to teach our team. And I think you had just finished or were working on your first C# book.
Yes, I got my book with O'Reilly through an incredible lucky experience, which is that I called my editor at Sam's, where I had done my C++ book. And I said, I'd like to do a book on C#. And they said, well, we already gave that to someone else. And after I grumbled and complained, I sent an email to an editor at O'Reilly. And he had just come back from a meeting with Tim, who had said, find somebody to do a C# book. And sitting on his desk was my email. So I'm talking about timing.
Exact timing. And who was that?
Stop the tape because he'll kill me. John Osborne.
John Osborne, yeah.
He's going to kill me for hesitating over his name because he was my editor for a long time. He's a really great guy and a friend, and I just have no brain. But John Osborne was the editor at O'Reilly, and we worked together on a number of books.
Yeah, he's exceptional. I worked with him on a few projects there at O'Reilly. One book that never got published, and then when I was an editor of their online zine for a while.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I was a PC Magnet whiz-op. How's that for a claim to fame?
I have no idea what that is.
PC Magnet had a service.
Let's go back one more level. What's PC
Magazine? PC
Magazine. Okay, I thought you said Magnet several times.
I did. A PC Magazine had an online service called PC Magnet that ran on CompuServe, and the whiz-up was the guy who sort of managed the service,
like a moderator.
Right?
Yeah.
And that was definitely a claim to fame in its day. Not much today, I'm afraid.
Evidently.
And so I don't want to leave you with the wrong impression. Once I got into computers, it was pretty steady state. I did the Unix and C work, and then I did the C++ work, and then I switched over to C# and was programming for a very long time. But then when Silverlight came out, I was offered a job at Microsoft as originally it was working in Scott Guthrie's group.
Right.
And it turned into being a quasi-evangelist job. And I had a great time. But I did that for a number of years, and then I went to Telerik and did a similar thing. And as an evangelist, you're writing demo code.
Right.
And when you're writing demo code, if you run into something that's difficult and you're under deadline, you just do something else.
Right.
And so
you make it work for the show, not for production.
Right, exactly. So I really felt like A, the edge was coming off, and B, I had been in XAML land for like 6 years, and my web skills were definitely rusted. not rusting, rusted. They were rusted badly. So the past 6 or 7 months, I have really immersed myself in web technology, and I've just been put on a project that is scaring the willies out of me. I work for Falafel Software now, and it's a consulting shop, and I've been put on a product that has a pretty large team of some incredible developers and a huge code base. And this will be the opportunity for somebody to finally come along and say, we thought you knew how to program. So we'll see. We'll see how it goes.
But it's not programming, it's JavaScript.
No. This is that's true. There's some JavaScript and there's some C# and take that back. I don't understand. I really don't understand why we put up with what we put up with JavaScript. Because if you come from the C# world and you're used to strongly typed language with a integrated development environment that provides you all sorts of assistance and intelligence and on, and then you go to JavaScript and you find yourself saying, "Let me put the brace here. Oh, okay. Let me try putting the brace here. Oh, okay. Let me try putting the brace here." That's nuts.
Well, you're using the wrong editor. So yeah,
that may be.
Yeah, but I think that's true. That's in my mind a lot now because the course I'm working on for Pluralsight is basically trying to get people to be more rigorous about writing JavaScript.
Oh, good. I need to take that course.
So,
so what's the right editor?
Either WebStorm or as you wrote a course on, Sublime. I still do a lot in Sublime, but WebStorm is the one that is probably the richest. It has real IntelliSense, not the guessing IntelliSense from Sublime. Yes. And Visual Studio 2013 is getting close. It's still not there, but it's getting closer. But I still drop
one thing that WebStorm has that Sublime doesn't is it, as I understand it, is it has built-in JS hint, which is huge. That's a huge thing to have that built right in.
Yeah, but so does Visual Studio.
Yes. And so I'll probably bounce among all three of them.
Yeah, I usually have all three. I usually have all three installed. If I need to do some, if I really need IntelliSense, if I need real IntelliSense, which I've learned to live without because I did for so many years, that it's never been, I've been the guy who wants to turn it down to 2, whereas I feel like Visual Studio has it up to 11.
Yes.
Because I don't want that much help. I want to be able to
I want all the help I can get. Thank you.
Yeah.
My daughter was watching me code one day, and between IntelliSense and ReSharper, she watched for a few minutes and said, "Why are they paying you? It's doing everything."
Close. Yeah. I actually don't use ReSharper for the same reason. Don't slow down my typing is my
Makes it too
mantra.
Easy. Yeah,
no, it's not about being too easy. It's just about I'm typing at a certain speed. Stop trying to stop and interrupt me to help me.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, the overeager clerk.
Yes.
Can I help you with that, sir? Can I show you one in the size? Yeah.
It's Clippy for programmers.
Oh, that's mean.
Yeah, that's.
Oh man,
there are several people.
Put that in their ad.
There are several people that I'm good friends with over there at ReSharper that don't like my.
Yeah, they're going to want you to cut that part. Yeah. What can I say?
They're not a sponsor yet, so maybe we can work out a deal.
There you go. They'll stop saying it if they'll sponsor your show. You're going to do another course on ethics in programming?
I'm not sure I'm qualified. Well, I want to thank you for being on the podcast. It's been great hearing the story of how you kind of went from one place to another. And it's always nice to talk to somebody who's been doing it longer than I have, so I don't feel so old.
Just call me Gramps. Thank you.